Okay, this is a new start. Beyond the Fight is no more. The Drewsperience is officially in the house. And when I started this new show, I had a lot of options to choose from. I posted a poll on Instagram. I had some interesting choices, but why should I try something new when I could just have one of the OGs that helped with Beyond the Fight? And that's my friend Adam from the Unanimous Decision, the podcast about MMA and other combat sports. Adam's had some great interviews with guys who are up and comers, current professionals, and coaches. So please give it a listen. And honestly, it's like I wouldn't be doing videos if it wasn't for him or Terry from Hot Sauce Sports. So shout out to him as well, because it's the first time I really go doing video to build my new show. So welcome to the Drewsperience, Adam.
Thanks, man. It's a pleasure to be here. I was a big fan of Beyond the Fight, and I'll be sure to be an even bigger fan of the Drewsperience. Thanks again for the intro about the Unanimous Decision. It has been a nice work in progress, rather.
Yeah.
The podcast is, slowed up a little bit now that work is up and running still, but definitely something that I'm still going to provide enough great content for all the viewers.
That makes sense, man. Yeah. So when I thought of doing the Drewsperience, I really had to kind of change it up because I felt when I was doing the Beyond the Fight, I did very good with the Kyokushin community. I'm not saying anything bad, but it was kind of like the same conversations I was having over and over. And when it gets monotonous, you want to change it up. So, I mean, I'm still to my roots. I still love the art, but I'm branching out. I want to do other stuff with the show other than talk about only one art when Beyond the Fight was originally supposed to be MMA. But I'll still have some repeat guests on from the community in that art. But it's off to try new things and seeing what you're doing with the Unanimous Decision. Like you have Lawrence on, you have Fish on from for basketball. You've had other friends on, and you got to vary it up. And that's what I think is going to keep the show going and keep it entertaining.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of a podcast is you could essentially make it anything that you want it to be. I am greatly passionate about combat sports, but there are too many people out there with too many other interests that I don't want to lose out on. And I know you don't want to lose out on also. Jordan Fishman was, I had him on the show twice for 2 basketball podcasts. He just dropped a new podcast that's called Ball Don't Lie. A great podcast, 3 episodes out already. Everyone should give it a listen on Spotify and Apple Music. But let's focus on the Drewsperience today, baby.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's been quite a while since I was back, started a new job and got burned out with that. So I had to take a break to rebalance and rebuild. But, this is the first chapter and what I think is going to be something permanent. I love the logo. Shout out to my friend Steven Toste for doing an amazing graphic art job for the Street Fighter 2 logo, bringing that 90s feel for anyone that grew up in the 90s playing those Capcom games. And hit it off with, we had a great UFC on the weekend, and it wasn't like one of the best cards, I'm not going to lie. I even missed it on my own birthday because I wasn't really impressed with it. But we had a great co-main and a pretty good main event, I would say.
Absolutely. I only got to the main event, in RDA versus Paul Felder. I was certainly impressed with RDA's performance. I thought that it really paid dividends to have him come back into the lightweight division after a stint in the welterweight division. I really thought that the speed was there. He gave Felder trouble in the southpaw stance. And more importantly, it was pretty evident that he was preparing his wrestling for Islam Makhachev, but not only in a defensive manner like Conor McGregor did against Khabib, but actually in a very offensive manner as well, where he looked to take Felder down, nullify the strong striking and Muay Thai and kickboxing of Paul Felder. And one of the most exciting things about it is that Paul Felder actually fought a really great fight considering he took the fight on less than a week's notice, and he was also training for a triathlon and not an MMA fight. But, I do think that should the leg kicks have landed a little bit more and he threw them with more frequency, I think that would have slowed down RDA's pace, maybe time that left hand with an inside leg kick on the lead leg. However, that's the way she goes when you're fighting a guy with so much experience and with a full training camp.
Exactly. And, RDA just keeps proving us wrong and wrong again. Like the guy had a great run at welterweight because he was too small for the He was too big for the lightweight division. The weight cut was getting to him. What really impressed me was what really impresses me about RDA is you look at the record, and one of the most underrated losses was he lost to Khabib before Khabib became Habib, and not many people realize that. They like to throw RDA under the rug, or also the fact that he was the guy that was supposed to fight Conor but pulled out because of an injury. But I just think RDA just never gets the appreciation he deserves.
No, I don't think he does. And obviously that does play a factor due to the fact that he doesn't maybe speak the best English. He's not, a marketable fighter in the sense that guys are lining up to listen to him talk in the press conferences, et cetera, et cetera. And I think another thing also is that if you look at his resume, he's beaten a lot of people's or fans' favorite fighters. So that certainly plays a role in it as well.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'll never take anything away from a champion of his stature, but let's be honest. No one was lining up to watch him after he beat Anthony Pettis, as you just said. Like, Pettis was a very big fan favorite. A lot of people felt that, when he won the belt from Benson Henderson, the Showtime era would he to stay for a long time. And RDA just took that momentum away. And, I think his reign as a champion was like a mix of between very short and very unsatisfying. He fought Cowboy, then he lost to Alvarez, and then we all know how history played out from the lightweight division from there.
Yeah, absolutely. After he lost the title to Eddie Alvarez, it kind of went downhill from there. He moved up to 170 pounds, went on a 2-fight losing streak, which I don't believe any of those fights were anywhere close to him winning in that favor. And then he made the right move and he came back down to 155.
Yeah. He's definitely someone that, he's now clamoring for that McGregor fight again. And it's pretty funny how they were supposed to fight twice already. One time for the lightweight title, the other time for like an interim welterweight title. And maybe the third time it happens. Who knows? But when people start trying to predict fights, I start to think, I think Conor could beat RDA. There's something that tells me that he could have beat him the first time because Nate Diaz posed a bigger problem, but in a sense a better rival. But I feel like RDA is like someone that McGregor could easily put on his resume. I don't want to sleep on RDA, but I just think it's a kind of Conor's fight since RDA is a striker.
Well, absolutely. And another thing too is in that regard, it is southpaw versus southpaw. I do think that McGregor has the speed advantage. I definitely think that he has the power and the strength. However, if RDA goes out there and fights a similar fight, how he fought Paul Felder and utilizes that wrestling, I think that, he could pose some threats for McGregor, but the inactivity on the ground once he actually brought Felder down wasn't really holding him down and using vicious grounded pound, et cetera, not looking to really pass half guard or whatever the case may be. I don't think that is the strategy in fighting McGregor on the ground. So if I'm comparing an RDA who just fought Paul Felder versus a Conor McGregor, then I don't see a victory going in the way of RDA. But another thing also is that when you're fighting a guy like McGregor and he's talking all that shit to you before, during, and after the fight, it's kind of hard to not see red in the octagon and lose sight of that game plan, So I do give the edge to McGregor, absolutely. And do I think that RDA has a shot? Sure, why not? But I do think that he has to be far more active on the ground and utilize his ground and pound along with his wrestling control, looking to advance positions, looking to maybe go for a few submissions, and along the way, obviously pounding the head in with that ground and pound.
Yeah, it's really crazy. And one thing that I was watching recently is, have you ever, when you're on YouTube, have you ever come across the channel Keon Kimura? He does these videos of how good was Royce Gracie or how good was GSP truly. It's really great content. He just did one. I sent it to you. How good was Vitor Belfort actually? That's him. Really good. Does an unbiased breakdown from the start of their career to the end and where he rates them on a scale of 1 to 10. And he's even interviewed some fighters, but when you look at the history, like some of these fighters are forgotten. Like he did one on Ken Shamrock. And I think, fans of today, they don't really know the greats. So I think it's important. I think it's really important to bring highlights of the originals because a lot of casuals come in and say, I got in because of GSP, or I got in because of Anderson, or I got in because of Connor, and they don't know the past Adam. And what do you think of guys like that, who bring that content of the greats to kind of like educate the casuals or like newbies who are getting into the sport?
Well, I think that it's fantastic for the sport. I mean, a lot of people, you know, look at Wikipedia resumes and they look at the records and they look at, just the guys' names, et cetera. They take everything at face value is what I'm trying to say. And when you take the sport of MMA at face value, you're going to be strongly mistaken about a lot of things. That's why you need guys like this gentleman who's going to go into detail and kind of bring you back through the real lens of who the guys who the fighters were combating against, but also who the fighter was and what their skill sets were. So I'm a big fan of that type of content. I haven't had the pleasure of listening to it yet, but I do think that it is entirely important because, there are a lot of podcasts and MMA analysts, et cetera, that take everything at face value because the detail and the historians and the kind of the hardcore esqueness to the sport does not sell anymore, does not bring viewership, unfortunately. And that's why, lately sometimes we feel that we're getting more of a watered down version of the sport or whatever the case may be, because, a lot of guys are a little bit fearful of going too far into detail, like a Robin Black, for example, because people just look at him like he's fucking crazy and he's over exaggerating. So
Yeah.
I think that this YouTube channel is fantastic. And I think that guys do need to take a good look at it. I don't know what he said about George. I don't know what he said about Vitor, but if I'm looking at Vitor Belfort, who beat Vanderlei Silva when he was 19 years old in one of the first UFCs, or I'm looking at a guy like George St. Pierre who fought during one of the toughest welterweight eras in UFC history, I'm hoping that he said some pretty fucking good things about these guys.
Oh, he really did. Yeah. And his name is Keon Kimura. So shout out to him. I love his channel. He's one of the other reasons why I wanted to get on video with my show. And he said he's like, how great was George? He's like, he was amazing at everything. He wasn't like a great at one specific, but he was well-rounded at everything, which is why he was one of the welterweight, which is why he's one of the welterweight greats and will go down as one of the greatest of all time. And he said about Vitor, he's like, it should not, he's like, even though Vitor's career is like under, I'm paraphrasing here, he said, even though Vitor's career is under controversy for his role with TRT and whatnot, he's like, we have to also remember he fought a very dangerous Vanderlei Silva and made him look extremely human in that 40-second pressure knockout in Brazil.
Well, there you have it, man. I agree. I think that what Vitor did against Vanderlei Silva was thoroughly impressive. I mean, if you look at Vanderlei Silva's resume and what he's done in the UFC, what he did in Pride, it's one for the ages.
I still think though, Vanderlei this is something that I wanted to really talk about you about, because when we were texting, I said I wanted to kick it back to like old fights that or maybe old fighters. And when we did the top 10, like middleweight, light heavyweights with Terry, we said that you said that Vanderlei was up there, but more for the Pride accomplishments. Because when he came back to the UFC, we weren't getting the Vanderlei from the year 2001 until 2005. We got like a used, beat up Corvette at Vanderlei Silva, you can say, where the wear and tear was starting to show.
Go on.
No, I just wanted to see what you thought about that, because if you agree with that point, because when Vanderlei came back, it was billed as like one of the best things. Like I remember when MMA was at its high point in the golden years of 2006 to 2010, and when they said when they got the Pride guys, do you remember like how much of a hype there was that they got the Pride guys?
There was a very big hype, and one of the bad part about it, one of the shitty parts about it was that a lot of the contracts were invalid, so they weren't really able to do as much as they thought they were with most of those fighters. In fact, the best thing that they got from it was having the access to the fights to show on UFC Fight Pass. Besides that, yeah, they did get a couple of people along with the show that were able to help build the UFC's brand. I mean, look, if we're looking at a Vanderlei Silva that joined the UFC after his Pride career, I don't believe that was the same Vanderlei Silva that, the UFC was expecting. I don't think that was the same Vanderlei Silva that was performing in Pride. And I don't think the UFC was expecting that, and they were using his name and his legacy to help build that up. But I think that fans learned quite quickly besides maybe the Chuck and Vanderlei fight that happened, the same fight that George St. Pierre fought Hughes. Besides that, I don't really think that we entirely got the same Vanderlei Silva that we saw in Pride. One of those reasons was UFC 92. If you take Rampage Jackson versus Vanderlei Silva, the Vanderlei Silva that we saw who fought Rampage in Pride, that was a different animal. That was a man who grabbed the back of Rampage Jackson's neck and beat him viciously with the tie clinch until his head was hanging through the ropes. And when we saw him against Rampage in the UFC, yeah, sure, he was swinging for the fences and the intensity was there, but the poise, the setups, the skill set, the overall logic on how he was going to beat Rampage Jackson certainly wasn't there, and that's what got him knocked out by a left hook.
And then he was kind of never the same after. His record, I think, was like 4-6 or 4-8, which is like really below average for like a legend like Vanderlei. However, I think, as you just pointed, the positive of the Pride purchase was that fans who are getting into the sport and they want to look at good fights, they should look at the Pride fights. And some of those, and Pride had some pretty good guys, man. Like, I mean, they had, like, it was kind of like interesting. Like, if you weren't happy in the UFC, you'd go to Pride. And we saw this happen a lot, especially in the dark days where, when I say the dark days, it's the pre-Zuffa days where we saw like Murillo Bustamante, who was a jiu-jitsu legend. He was one of the early middleweight champions, vacated his belt because of a contract dispute with the UFC. And Pride was paying more. They had the fans, they had the arena, they had the venues to pay and really make money. They had guys like Mark Coleman, Josh Barnett. The list goes on. And I just think when we got those Pride guys in 2007, it was a big wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, for the most part, I would say. But at the same time, they did put asses in the seats and they did have a little bit more longevity in the UFC brand than I thought they did. And, Vanderlei Silva still did bring us one of the more exciting fights at UFC Japan when Vanderlei Silva fought Brian Stann, and he actually, beat Brian Stann because Brian Stann just threw away his game plan and just said, fuck it, I'll fight Vanderlei's fight in Japan, where I know that Vanderlei is a complete and utter hero.
Yeah, that just shows the respect that a guy like the Axe Murderer has among his peers. And it's too bad, like, the way his career ended in the UFC was not. It's kind of going to go down as like one of the more infamous spats between fighter and company. However, I think he's in bare knuckle fighting now. He had like a little stint in Bellator, and I don't know, like, I mean, the thing is with the legends, they're going to do whatever. It's kind of like they run the ship in Bellator, if you agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the legends could go wherever they want, and they are going to do what they are going to do. That's why we're seeing Mike Tyson fighting Roy Jones Jr. at the end of the month. And, I do believe that there is maybe some type of case for building a little bit of a legends division between boxing and MMA, having guys like Vitor Belfort, Chael Sonnen, Vanderlei Silva, Rampage Jackson, etc., and then naming the boxing legends as well. And, having these guys go into separate events and, maybe bend the rules a little bit with PEDs and Mexican supplements and all of that help. Because if you want my opinion, do I think that Mike Tyson is au natural right now? Hell to the fucking no. And do I think that, when Vitor Belfort went over to one championship and then he looked all ripped and jacked all of a sudden, was it all au natural? Hell to the no. So, you know what? I think there is a case for this Legends division, and I think that there is money to be made off of it. I just think the sad thing is that unless they completely and utterly promote that these guys are on steroids and these guys are both mutually agreeing to it because they're both on steroids, besides that, they're going to have a little bit of a hard case to sell.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like there's also the case, like, why are you fighting in your 40s and 50s? You have to enjoy life. You got to find other things to do with your life. There's that case too. It's kind of like the tragic with that Legends division. But from a fan's point, would I want to see like a Legends division like that? Oh yeah, like I'd love to see a division where we could see guys like Chuck, Tito, Rampage, Murillo Bustamante, Fedor, like Vonderlei. That'd be great. Like, I think that would kind of really bring some nostalgia to us as hardcores, like who grew up in the golden age. But I think it would also give some education to the new fans coming in, like the younger generation, to understand like why these guys are so heralded and why they're so respected in their division and history.
100%, my man. And that's why it's important for, YouTube channels and podcasts like mine and yours to be able to promote this past history in the great sport of mixed martial arts and boxing, because I think a lot of combat sports fans are very much so, what have you done for me lately? And they don't understand that this sport has a hell of a lot more history in it than some people realize.
Yeah, exactly. Like my first UFC event was it was in 2007, and I think it was UFC 79, like yours. Like as you said, that was your first fight with GSP versus Hughes 3 with Liddell versus Vanderlei as a co-main. I didn't watch all of it, but I think I watched the highlights on TSN because TSN would show the highlights of MMA very briefly. It was still kind of a very niche sport still, but I can definitely say that prior to Brock Lesnar coming in, which helped, I think, put one stage of explosion to evolve the sport. I think before that, like it was a powder keg ready to explode. They just needed some more pieces to the puzzle.
100%. I agree with you there. And, I do think that this is something that needs to keep going on for the longevity of the sport.
Yeah, we always need to have, but I really think what helped put the sport on the stratosphere to where it is presently with ESPN, three things that happened. First, the deal with the first MSG event at UFC 205 4 years ago. I think to put the sport into Madison Square Garden, the home of combat sports, where guys like Frazier Ali happen, or some other famous boxing fights. That really helped put the sport into another stratosphere with like the public.
Yeah, 100%. And I do think that stars like George St. Pierre really did help bring that more to the mainstream as well, because at the time, he did win Canada's Canadian Athlete of the Year. So he was postered all over TSN. And, we do know that TSN does basically copy a little bit of a model that ESPN puts out.
Exactly. It's the Canadian sibling of ESPN, basically. And then the other thing that happened was obviously the Conor Floyd boxing fight to bridge the two sports to see who does better. And yeah, it was a freak show, but listen, you know what? At the end of the day, it helped put eyes on the sport. And then the third thing that happened was it was a mix of two things. It was UFC 241, dawn of the anti-hero era, as you coined it when I did be on the fight with you back in the Dizzy, and then UFC 244, the BMF title, because there's two reasons. One, you had two OGs in Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal that were like really getting eyes on the sport. You had Donald Trump. Who would have thought an American president would show up to an MMA event? Never happens.
Well, there's a lot of things that President Trump did that a lot of other presidents haven't done in the past, but we'll save politics for another episode.
Yeah,
the year of the anti-hero was a very important thing. Very, very important thing. We saw that in Jorge Masvidal, Colby Covington, Nate Diaz, even Nick Diaz. Josh Koscheck was an anti-hero back in the day as well. We Conor McGregor to an extent is a hero / anti-hero. So we do see a lot of anti-heroism, heroism, whatever the fuck you want to call it, constantly replaying in the UFC, and it is one of the biggest reasons why they are in the position that they are in.
Yeah, same with a guy like Adesanya, but Adesanya kind of reminds me more of like that quirky guy that in high school was a big anime fan, since he kind of like lives anime in real life. And now he's like angling for that big money fight with John Jones, who's a real anti-hero in himself. Like it's like everybody hates on me for liking Johnny Bones, but look,
John Jones was a good one. That's one that I definitely forgot about. John Jones is probably the ultimate anti-hero, but you know what? At the same time, I'm more comfortable just calling him a straight up villain.
Yeah, because we've seen now, like before he was like acting like he was like a good Christian, and then he'd make those condescending remarks to other fighters. But I kind of like him as a villain. I like this John where he doesn't talk about being a good Christian. Like I like him where he's barking at DC still, and he's still sour about the whole pound for pound thing because of Khabib supplanting him. And I mean, and I'm not trying to say, look, I'm not hating Khabib, but I respect Habib, and Habib's accomplished everything, basically. However, when I look at the pound-for-pound GOATs, it's who's done it the longest. You look
Yeah.
at the short list of John Jones. Shogun Rua at 23 years old, a legend, pride legend. Like, now we're getting Shogun, who's on the way out. Fought a dangerous Rampage when Rampage could have easily taken his head off. Fought Machida, who people thought was the hardest match for him. Fought Rashad Evans, who gave John his first 5-round fight. He fought Vitor, and Vitor almost beat John Jones, if you remember, with that armbar.
Yeah, you know what, though? I spoke about it on one of my later episodes, or in fact, my last episode with Kyle McLaughlin from thefightsite.com. And you know what? It's like, to be real with you, it's like Shogun, you know, in some ways was a bit over the hill. Rashad Evans was almost a bit of a shell of himself as well, because he wasn't at, you know, Jackson's and Wink at the time. And, you know, one of the reasons that that's a tell that Rashad Evans was over the hill is that Jackson and Wink didn't have any use for him anymore, and they ditched him and moved on to John Jones. And they've done that in the past with other fighters as well. They thought that Mike Perry was their new diamond in the rough, so they kicked Donald Cerrone to the curb, you know. So we have seen that in the past. You know, Vitor Belfort probably was completely on steroids. Chael Sonnen, you know, so to be honest with you, man, like, look, do I think that John Jones fought a lot of the fights that do I think that a lot of the fights that John Jones fought were against opponents that were in their prime? Absolutely not. Did I think that he fought the biggest names in the business? Absolutely so. But I do think that if we took at that moment, a present John Jones versus all of his opponents, maybe 5 years prior of that version of, I think that a lot of his fights would have been a lot closer. And, you know, also, if you're looking at the way John Jones has performed in his last few fights, seems to be playing it safe, wants to do just enough to win the bouts. You know, I do sound very critical of John because, you know, maybe perhaps I'm not the biggest fan of him. But at the same time, you know, I look at a guy like George St. Pierre, who fought a lot of guys in Murder's Row in their fucking prime. And it showed that when they weren't fighting George, what those guys were capable of. And I just didn't really, you know, always get the same vibe from John Jones's opponents.
What do you think of, okay, so George almost fought Mike Swick, and Mike Swick is a very respectable welterweight, done very well outside the UFC with his podcast, one of the best with Real Quick with Mike Swick. And Dan Hardy pulled the upset on Swick to get that title fight. But how do you how would you see a fight of Swick going with George? Would it be just as what happened to Hardy, or do you think
it would have been just as one-sided? I think that Mike Swick maybe wouldn't have gotten his arm caught in some sticky situations like Dan Hardy did, but at the end of the day, I just didn't think that Mike Swick was made for the welterweight division. Felt that, like a Robert Whittaker, he would have performed better at middleweight, having more muscle on his body, having to less cut weight. You know, except back then, size did matter. And if you were the biggest dog in your division, you were at an advantage. But I don't think that Mike Swick had a chance. I mean, I don't think that he would have been able to catch George St. Pierre in his famous Swickatine. And I also don't think that his stand-up game would have fared enough for George St. Pierre. Look, I think that George could have also stood and beat Dan Hardy up for 5 rounds. But the thing was about George is that he never fought an opponent where his strong suits were. And that is the biggest difference between George and a lot of fighters in the UFC, is that George knows your weakness and he fully exploits it. And that's why a lot of fans maybe at some points thought that George was a boring fighter, because George didn't fight fire with fire. George fought fire with water.
Exactly. Like, look at a guy like John Fitch. Like, he fought John. I think we could say he fought John Fitch at Fitch's own game, but he mixed it up too, which gave Fitch fits, basically. And I think that's one of the more underrated fights of GSP's career that not many people remember. Like, they remember he won the title back from Sarah, and then they kind of skip ahead to BJ Penn, the Thiago Alves, the Dan Hardy, the Josh Koscheck, the Jake Shields, and so on. But a lot of people forgot about that UFC 87 fight, and I wanted to get your 2 cents on that from what you remember of that title fight between Fitch and GSP.
Oof. I mean, that was one of the closer fights in George St. Pierre's title fight run. I think that Fitch was hot at the time. You know, he had some of the strongest wrestling that George St. Pierre had to fight against, and brought a little bit of a similar style to George on the wrestling and jiu-jitsu aspect. perhaps. But on the feet, I do think that George was a lot lighter on his feet due to his Kyokushin background, and was a more well-versed fighter on the feet. However, in the long run, I mean, look, not all of George St. Pierre's wins also were emphatic victories. He did have tough fights as well. He didn't make every single fight look easy, and that's okay. But in the long run, what John Fitch was able to do with his career after beating George St. Pierre versus what GSP was able to do, it's pretty clear that GSP is one of the greatest of all time. However, to credit John Fitch and the rest of George St. Pierre's opponents, dude, a lot of George St. Pierre's opponents went on to do very, very amazing things after they lost to George. And that really just goes to show you the caliber that George St. Pierre fought.
Oh yeah,
and Fitch is one of those guys.
Yeah, Fitch went on to become a World Series of Fighting champion. Unfortunately, though, his style was never grasped by the fans, because it's everyone, they like watching the knockouts and the strikers in MMA. But Fitch, he's gonna go down, I think, as one of the best welterweights. Maybe not in the top 10, but in like a top 15 or 20.
Yeah, I could see him definitely being there in the top 20. But, one little Easter egg that you're not dropping on the first episode of the Drewsperience is that you, in fact, interviewed John Fitch. So why don't you talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm going to talk. John's an interesting cat, man. He's a very interesting guy, very well-spoken, very cool. Very fortunate that he gave me his time to talk to him, and said great things about George. He said if he could go back in time, he would want to fight a prime George because of how dangerous George was and how dangerous Fitch was at the time, as they were saying. We also went into the business side of MMA, of how with like the Ali Act being brought up time and time again for MMA fighter pay. Fitch was explaining the business behind Zuffa, and I don't know if you listened to this on the Luke Thomas episode of Rogan, but did you hear about that class action lawsuit that's being launched, like about the business practices of the UFC?
No, let's hear it, man.
Okay, so I don't know much about it. So and I know it sounds crazy, but it's a much bigger thing. So I'm gonna butcher a lot of the what they said about it. But it's basically to look at how the UFC was buying out other promotions to be a monopoly. Strikeforce being one. Elite XC. You know how it is when the UFC felt that, or Pride. Remember when Pride came to the US and that kind of really scared the UFC to make a move to keep their business going?
Well, that's a tough one, man. That's tough for me to answer. Oof.
Yeah, it's a very complex question, because you have to have like someone like who understands business of whatnot, especially with the business of sports. It's a very complicated case, Fitch said, and if it goes to the Supreme Court, which it could, that could make some big changes for the whole sport.
Well, how do you feel about it? And then maybe once I get your grasp, I'll be able to chime in a bit better.
I kind of understand where Fitch is coming from. Fighters should be paid more. It doesn't make sense that the promotion gets this amount of money and the fighters are left with it's a trickle down effect, basically. It's kind of like a boogeyman version of Reaganomics, from what I understand from this all. Like, you're paid to show and this, and and then you only really make money if you're in the pay-per-view model, which only lasts for so long. You could be like a title contender for like one pay-per-view, and that's like the best earnings you're ever going to get for your entire fight career.
Right.
So
yeah, I do think that fighters do absolutely need to get paid more. The problem is that you have one promoter for over 150, 200 fighters. Whereas if you're watching, boxing promoters, these guys have a smaller stable of fighters. But for example, Eddie Hearn, he almost acts as if his only pride and joy is Anthony Joshua, whereas Dana White might do that for Conor McGregor, but he doesn't really do that for the rest of the roster. I do think that the reason why the UFC fighters don't get paid enough is one of those reasons is the fact that money equals power, and the more that they could undermine them by paying them a bit less, perhaps then the UFC will then constantly have that upper hand against its roster. And I know it's not right, and I know that these guys are put through a hell of a lot, but at the end of the day, if you really think about it, we're not in the leather helmets era, but maybe we're just starting to wear face masks, if I want to use a football or hockey term. You know, I think that only maybe now are we starting to put visors on or whatever the case may be. So still plenty of things to happen in the works with the UFC and the fighters pay scale. But it constantly does seem like a reoccurring issue. I mean, look what's taking so long for McGregor and Poirier to sign is because, you know, Poirier wants his fucking money and they're not really giving a shit to give it to him.
Exactly, and it's just a classic case of like, what have you done for me? Like, what kind of name what does your name bring to the company as a brand? Like unless your name is, as mentioned, Israel Adesanya, Conor McGregor, Khabib, they're gonna get the gold standard of treatment. Like we saw UFC 254. Like, did you see like the cadre of SUVs picking up Khabib and his clique just to like get to the arena?
Yes, absolutely, and that is why Khabib is held on such a pedestal because he's a hero in the Middle East and he's the pride and joy of Abu Dhabi, and one of the reasons why, you know, the fact that Khabib is so well received to the UFC staff is also the pretty penny that people in Abu Dhabi have paid the UFC on the side to make sure that he is fighting in Abu Dhabi for on his 5-fight contract.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think he's retired? What's your honest gut telling you now?
Well, at first I thought that he was honestly retired, but you know, those emotions wear off. You know, you forget about that moment. You forget about how you feel when you watched Khabib after he was victorious against Justin Gaethje. That emotional feeling has faded, and now it just comes down to comes down to facts. The facts is that he won the fight, and he fought really well, and he's 29-0. And now that the emotion and the smoke has cleared, maybe I can see him fighting again. Yeah. How about you?
I mean, I listen to like what Swick says. I listen to what like his close circle says, and what it tells me is that he's gonna stay retired. But if they pull him out to get that, I mean, listen, I think they want to make that Tony fight finally happen, the one that got away. I think they want to see that fight happen. It's just a car wreck waiting to happen for both men. No one's getting out of that fight easy, whether win or lose.
You know what? I would love to agree with you, but I really think that Tony lost a lot of stock after getting his fucking ass kicked by Justin Gaethje. I really, really, really do think he did. And I don't know if the UFC is as interested in making that fight happen again. I really don't, for some weird reason. I guess maybe call me a little bit critical on Tony, but I just feel, you know, I just feel that fight is faded, and I think that they really realize, like Conor McGregor, Khabib and Conor could fight paper bags and it'll fucking sell billions and millions. So realistically, they don't really even need Tony Ferguson. So I don't think that that's the fight. I think that if anything, Dana wants to give Conor and Khabib another go. I don't really think that the interest of having Tony and Khabib in there is as plausible.
I really agree with you. I think Tony lost a lot of stock, not just with the brass, but with the fans too, with how he acted after he lost to Justin. And even like a lot of friends I have that like were Tony fans are like, I don't like the guy. Like they're like he showed his true colors. And like when you have an interview with him versus his opponents will give you a straight answer and they'll be honest. Tony will like go off on some tangent, saying he's like a Ninja Turtle, he's a champ shit only, and you know, like when I listened to his last interview with Helwani, very entitled. I mean, look, fighters are entitled, but I got a sense of pettiness from Tony. I don't do interviews. I don't do Joe Rogan. I don't do this. I don't do that. Like, bro, it's like, how are you going to expect to build your brand and keep consistent and keep present in the promotion if you're going to act like a little spoiled brat?
Well, the thing is also is that in his last fight, he got completely obliterated by Justin Gaethje. So not only do you want to sound stuck up and pretentious and make it seem like you're like the hipster of the lightweight division, that you're too good to go mainstream, we also got your fucking ass kicked in the fight. And then you go on Ariel Helwani's show on ESPN and you use the F word every third word, where they can't even use anything that you're saying to sample in any of the promotion because all you're doing is swearing in it. And another thing also is that after a while, when you're listening to a guy just go off the deep end after getting his ass kicked, and you know the fight with Khabib never panning out and whatever, it leaves a sour taste in people's mouth, and it leaves a very disinterested taste in people's mouth.
Yeah, I get the feeling that people have kind of moved on from Tony Ferguson as a fighter. He'll still have his fans, but
Yeah, of course he'll still have his fans, but at the end of the day, you know, if McGregor's back and Poirier's in there and Michael Chandler is now in the division and Justin Gaethje is still a formidable opponent and is still a guy that a lot of UFC fans and MMA fans like, then you have Dan Hooker on the rise as well. It's like, well, like, you know what, dude, it's like shit or get off the pot. Like, you know, run with us or, you know, be chased out, plain and simple.
exactly. You know, there's something that no one's really talking about. Santiago Ponzinibbio is making his return, and that's a guy that's a dark horse I have in the welterweight division. I always felt that he was the guy that could solve Kamaru Usman and give him problems. And he's coming back after he had some staph infection or like really bad infection that almost apparently killed him, he said. And he's coming back to fight an unranked opponent just to get back into the swing of things. But he was number 7. If you remember, Santiago was number 7 ranked when he fought Neil Magny in Argentina. Do you remember that?
Absolutely. I mean, look, man, Ponzinibbio is a very unorthodox welterweight, brings a good skill set to the table. And, you know, I do think that he is somebody that a lot of fighters in the division need to watch out for. I do think that him, you know, him going away from the sport due to an infection and not maybe necessarily being a household name might hurt him perhaps. Because if you think about it, since he's been away, not one person has mentioned his name. And that's exactly why he's fighting an unranked opponent or a little bit of a no-namer. Who is he fighting?
Some Dagestani guy. Let me pull up the name here. So I believe he's gonna fight. Let me pull it up. Pull that shit up, Jamie. Let me look it up. It's one of those Dagestani guys in the welterweight division, unranked. I think he's an older veteran.
He's fighting Muslim Salikov.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. The Kung Fu Panda or something like that. And I don't know. I mean, if he wins, great. Does it put him back in the rankings? I don't really think so. He's got a long way to go. But, I mean, I really wish we got that fight versus Usman because they said he was the one that could give Kamaru some big problems.
It's possible, but if you're looking at the scale of the welterweight division now, I don't really see where Ponzinibbio will sit in it. I mean, look, this guy's had 5 fights in the UFC. He's on a 4-fight winning streak. He lost his first fight to Alex Garcia by rear naked choke. But I just don't think that Ponzinibbio is somebody who's on the radar because what people fail to forget is that when you go away, another man will shine. And one of those people is Jorge Masvidal. And Masvidal is one of the number one, it was involved in one of the number one bought UFC pay-per-views of 2020. And it certainly wasn't because of Kamaru Usman. It was because of Jorge Gamebred Masvidal. So, you know, he's got to fucking get in line there because you're looking at the likes of Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal, you know. It's going to be a tough go for him to just slide in there, Ponzinibbio, and try to reclaim a title shot.
Yeah, it's very funny you said that. When one man leaves, it's another man's gain, and that's what happened. Like at the end of 2018, like Jorge was kind of on the downs, looking out, dropped from the rankings significantly because he was on the Spanish reality show, came back, starched till. We know the story, and yeah, it just goes to show like how crazy things can go. But it's like Masvidal's rise is like one of the weirdest things, but at the same time we could say it's weird, but it's like one of the most motivating. Like if you're like a guy or a girl that's like in your 30s, you're unhappy with where you are, like that's realized potential. Masvidal has realized potential when he realized that he put the tools together.
Absolutely. And another guy we haven't mentioned is Gilbert Burns. I mean, look at Gilbert Burns. The guy was fighting on the prelims, and now he's supposed to fight Kamaru Usman for the title. So that's another guy that certainly deserves his recognition. I mean, you know, it would have been interesting if they would have threw Ponzinibbio, Chimanov. That would have been interesting just to see where Chimanov also Kazmat proclaims in the division. They ranked him at number 15 right now, but, you know, he obviously thinks that he's number 1.
I know. Kazmat is a very interesting case. Like, I mean, he's one of those Dagestanis that we haven't seen, but already he's kind of annoying me with, like, trying to be the bad boy version of Khabib. And, I mean, look, we know how it is these Dagestanis. Like, they've proven to be somewhat unstoppable. But I have a feeling, you know, Khamzat is I mean, I think Leon Edwards is going to derail the hype train. Something just tells me it's going to be one of those fights where we wiped it off thinking it's an easy win, and Leon just comes in and just spoils the night for everybody.
Yeah, man. Well, look, Leon Edwards is no fucking slouch. Leon Edwards was a very, very tough fight for RDA. You know, he lost to RDA in that, and obviously Chimanov is a bigger body, stronger wrestling, et cetera, et cetera. But look, man, Leon Edwards has been in bigger fights in the UFC than Chimanov has, and Leon Edwards hasn't been handed things as well as Kazmat has either. So I think that Leon Edwards is certainly going to walk into that bout with a chip on his shoulder, use his experience, use his grit, and, you know, hopefully come away with the victory and humble Kazmat.
It's a very basic style he has, but it's very effective. I mean, look at the names. He beat Gunnar Nelson. He beat Vicente Luque. He beat RDA. He gave RDA a hard time. As mentioned, he doesn't have anything flashy, but it's that basic, kind of reminds me of a very poor man's Gegard Mousasi. Very basic, doesn't get the recognition, but it gets the job done.
I can see where you're coming from in that. I could absolutely see where you're coming from.
And yeah, and then we have the biggest announcement, Holloway versus Qatar. Wow, I love this fight. Like when you sent me that post today, I was tripping. I was like jaw dropped. This is I love featherweight. Featherweight is just such a deep division right now.
Featherweight certainly is a deep division. Look, man, I love Calvin Kattar. He has some insane boxing along with some really, really strong wrestling. You know, Max Holloway has strong boxing, great takedown defense, good jiu-jitsu as well. So this is definitely going to be a fight for the ages. This fight will certainly be on the feet. You know, I see this fight going similar to Dustin Poirier versus Holloway, except Kattar is not as big as Dustin Poirier, which will then even out the playing field for Max Holloway. So, and you know, we saw that Max Holloway was actually doing well in the later rounds against Poirier. So I'm looking for this fight to go 5 rounds, and I'm looking for it to go to split decision, and there are going to be absolute fucking fireworks.
I agree. I really agree. It's just going to be nuts. I mean, and this is just going to really help Calvin Kattar's stock rise. He really does remind me of a more aggressive Dustin Poirier with that vicious boxing. Like, look how he took apart Jeremy Stevens. And he's one of those contender series. No, I think Kattar was not from the contender series, was he? Because he was kind of like up and down, basically. He just came in, and then he kind of like took a break, and then he came back from MMA, I think, right?
I believe so. I'm not really well versed in Calvin Kattar's story out of the ring, but what I do know about him in the ring is that he never quits. You know, had that fight had been 5 rounds against Zabit Magomed Sharapova, I do think that he would have fared quite well and maybe even squeaked out the victory. And also, I just think that he's, you know, his tenacity, the way he uses his boxing and complements it well with his wrestling. He always has his opponents thinking about the takedown, but, you know, doesn't need it because he just fucking swings some really, really, really tactical and positive leather in there. I like the way he sets up his punches. I like his footwork. I like his tenacity. And, you know, I don't even need to talk about Holloway. I like Holloway for the exact same reasons. I think one of the reasons why I like Holloway is that he's constantly evolving. And every time we see Max Holloway in the ring, whether it's coming off of a win or a loss, it always looks like we're seeing a newer and newer and newer version of him, which then evidently makes him look like a different fighter every time.
He's really impressed me a lot with his fast rise. He's one of the dark horses, too, I think, of 145. One last topic, because, you know, we've done a lot already. This is what I love about these podcasts. ESPN came out with their top MMA fighters under 25. I'm going to read you number 1 to 10. I think I sent it to you, but I'll make it fast. Number 1, we have, you know what, I'll start from number 10. Number 10, Umar Nurmagomedov, Habib's cousin that got signed to Bellator. Number 9, Sabina Mazo. Number 8, Armin Sarukian, who was one of the super prospects that we watched with Rafael
Yeah, also coached by Steven Latatsky, which is, you know, a new great friend of mine and somebody that I like to have on about every 2 months to interview him and discuss his new adventure and his adventure with his fighters. So I appreciate him being on the list.
Yeah, James Gallagher, who you're a big fan of in Bellator.
Absolutely.
Number 6, Macy Barber. Number 5, Brendan Allen. Number 4, Aaron Pico, but I think there's a bit of controversy with that one there. Song Yadong. Number 2, my boy Armenian, my fellow Armenian. I'm like 5% Armenian, so you got to support the Armenians. Edmund, the Golden Boy Shabazian. And number 1, Jimmy Crute. How do you fare out with these rankings?
Listen, I like the rankings very much. What I like about it is that there weren't many North American fighters on the list, which really goes to show you, how far this sport is really spreading and how far and wide the sport of MMA and boxing could really go, just combat sports in general. That's what I really like to see on it. What I also like to see about it is that not everybody on the list is a slugger. They're well-rounded fighters. They have good jiu-jitsu. They come from Sambo backgrounds. They are well versed in jiu-jitsu. They're not just people that are building highlight reels, et cetera, et cetera. James Gallagher, fantastic jiu-jitsu. Armin is a completely well-rounded fighter. Jimmy Crute has showed that he's a savage in the octagon as well. I believe he's from Australia. So, we really do have a global sport. It's the most global sport out there next to soccer, perhaps. And or football, as some like to call it. And another thing too is that it's not like it was back in the day in the GSP era, where if you were from England you didn't know how to wrestle or your jiu-jitsu wasn't that good. Now guys from all walks and in every corner of the country know how to do their kickboxing just as well as they know how to do their jiu-jitsu and their wrestling. And I think that that's fucking important for the growth of the sport, is eliminating those one-dimensional fighters and really building it a mixed martial arts world.
Yeah, I mean, we'll still have the specialists, but I think the specialists are kind of a dying breed, like the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, the Damian Maya, Stylebender. But I mean, Stylebender is now kind of transitioned into that really good, like, mixed martial artist. Like, he showed great takedown defense against Costa. Well, I mean, that wasn't really much of a grappling contest, but Izzy's like showing that he doesn't want to be known just as a kickboxer. He wants to be known as a mixed martial artist.
100%, and I agree with you on that. I mean, obviously, Izzy will always be known for his striking, but what some people fail to think about is that Izzy is one of the few fighters that lets his striking work to his advantage in the grappling department because of the distance that he stands at, and also the fact that his opponents always know that he's very strong as a counter fighter. It actually helps his takedown defense because guys are more hesitant. So if there is a shot or there is a closing of the distance, because he has his timing down so well, he can actually see things coming 1 or 2 seconds before they actually happen, which, kind of in a good or bad way makes it seem like his takedown defense in his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu is very good, but it's also the illusion of who he is as a fighter and the footwork that he uses.
Yeah, he's on another level. As they said, the saying goes, levels, man, levels, levels. And same with Stephen Thompson, too, who I had on the show, had the privilege of hosting him and his family, which I'm aiming to do again. They were lovely people to host. And when I watched that Vicente Luque fight at UFC 244, that just shows you how people are dodging him too as a fighter, because they don't want to get involved in that blitz and karate style, because it looks, like people think of karate, okay, they think they miss they kind of brush it under the rug, but Steven is as I said, still like a top 5 welterweight easily. He could compete for the title, and it's just a hard style, one of those styles that you can't really train for. You have to like just be in there with it.
Well, absolutely, man. I mean, look, Stephen Thompson has put in the work in the past in New York City with Chris Weidman at the Serra Longo camp. Matt Serra, great jiu-jitsu practitioner. Ray Longo, a great MMA coach. Chris Weidman, a fantastic MMA wrestler. So he's definitely putting in the work that he needs to get to continue to stay at the level that he's at. I mean, if his wrestling wasn't any good, Tyron would have had an easier time.
You want to hear something crazy? So do you remember when Steven fought Patrick Cote, and then we didn't hear from Stephen Thompson until he fought Jake Ellenberger? So Steven revealed that he was battling an injury, but while he was healing, he was going to Serra Longo's while Chris Weidman was champion to really improve his takedown defense and become a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for MMA.
Well, there you have it, man. Absolutely. And another thing also is that Patrick Cote adopted that sideways stance, I believe, after fighting Wonderboy Thompson.
It just goes to show you how, like, every fighter has an influence. And, it's nice to see that, like, Steven's style gets this respect it deserves. And, I mean, whether he wins a belt or not, I mean, in my book, he's a champion because look what he does outside for that gym in Simpsonville. And it's not about having the belt; it's what you do with your brand as a fighter. And that's why I look at it like with guys like Mike Swick, Stephen Thompson. You know, they find a way to really build themselves in fighting by what they do outside, and that's why I think when you have this platform to be a pro fighter, you got to use the most of it in any way possible.
Couldn't agree more, Andy.
So, Adam, now, first episode's concluded, very successful. I used to do one fight or one word, so now I'm going to change it up. What is one fight you really want to see in 2021?
One fight that I really want to see in 2021, I got to say, you know what? There are a couple of fights that I want to see. I want to see Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier. I want to see Justin Gaethje perhaps versus the likes of Michael Chandler or Dan Hooker. I also really want to see Israel Adesanya take on John Jones. And last but not least, I want to see Francis Ngannou back in the octagon.
Makes sense. All good choices, man. All right, so guys, this is the first episode of the Drewsperience, and you can catch Adam at Adam Caplan 13. He also has the podcast Unanimous Decision Instagram page, and he's got a podcast on Spotify, Apple, and other platforms for podcasts. So please subscribe to Unanimous Decision or watch Adam's Instagram live videos with the guys he has on. And yeah.
Thanks a lot, Andy. It was a pleasure being on the show, and I look forward to the upcoming episodes. I never did see the poll where you voted for the guests. I don't even know if you added me on the poll, but maybe I was a write-in ballot like Kanye West, baby.
maybe. But yeah, we'll do this again soon. We'll do it again. As I said, you're a repeat guest anytime.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it, buddy.
Anytime. Thank you.